who have spent any time in Rome know Donna. Everybody knows Donna in Rome, and Donna knows everybody. And I remember years ago when I was first assigned there, a good friend of mine, Frank Butler, said to me, if you need any favors while you're there, any doors opened, the person is Donna Orsuto. And it's true, I mean, because Donna is the epitome of what the Second Vatican Council has called for the laity to be in the church. I mean, full-fledged, active, contributor to the life of the church, with tons of integrity, and she really embodies the vision of the Second Vatican Council for a renewed church. Donna runs the Lay Center in Rome, which has enabled, countless laity over the past few decades to come and to study and get advanced degrees at the Roman universities. And so to empower other laity to make the contribution in the church that the laity by rite of baptism are called to make. And she's done so much for the Diocese of Rome as well. And with she's a member of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue and a member of the Ecumenical Commission for the Diocese of Rome. And she's just a marvelous person that, and then it's been so helpful to so many of our Carmelites directing their dissertations. I believe she's directing Father Emil's dissertation. You'll hear from Emil later, and in the program, and currently doing the dissertation, directing the dissertation for a very close friend of mine, a Polish Carmelite. And it's just, she just a wonderful educator, wonderful person, and as I said, a great model for Catholic laity today. So, Professor Donna Orsuto.
Thank you so much, Father Pat, for this warm welcome, and thank you to each of you for inviting me here today to really celebrate with you St. Teresa's gift to the 21st century, the gift that she is to us, to kind of join in the party with you. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And it's a great privilege, really, to be here among so many experts of Carmelite spirituality. Some of you are Carmelite scholars, but I think of all of you as experts. You're experts because you live Carmel. You share the Carmelite charism through your communities. So thank you for the gift that you are to the church. I have to admit that it's a bit scary to speak to such an illustrious crowd. I don't really consider myself a Teresian scholar or even an expert in Carmelite spirituality, though through divine providence, I've had many opportunities and privileges to reflect and to pray with Carmelite friends, and to study many of the Carmelite mystics. I think I can also count on Saint Teresa of Avila as a friend, a companion on the journey. She's been a friend for a very long time. And in this year of her celebration, her big anniversary celebration, I really wanted to spend time rereading and studying her writings. I started last summer with a stint at Whitefriars in Washington at the Carmelitana collection, using the Carmelitana collection. That was a wonderful launch into this project. And in November, I gave a conference. I was asked to give a conference in Dublin for the Carmelites there. And today, what I want to do is kind of build on what I did there, and focus on the theme of leadership in tough times, revisiting St. Teresa of Avila's book of her foundations. So specifically, my goal is this: to ask the question, what is St. Teresa's leadership style? How did she deal with the multiple obstacles and challenges in her reform efforts? What is her message for us today? As an introduction, I'd like to begin with a brief word about leadership, and then mention a few studies on St. Teresa as a leader. And then I'll actually delve into the book of her foundations by offering some background information and by suggesting some characteristics of Teresian leadership that emerge in this book. So that's the plan of action. I hope that's okay with you. If not, it's a little bit too late. So now, my Carmelite friends say this will work. Let's see. Oh, look at that. It works. This is a miracle. Okay. So first, a word about leadership. It is really a hot topic. And if you do an internet search, you will find all sorts of programs to inspire and train leaders. Business leaders, church leaders, educational leaders, any kind of leader you can imagine. Just to name one initiative, Harvard Business School boasts of a leadership initiative training program on their website saying, quote, "We undertake cutting-edge research and course development projects about leadership and leadership development, both within Harvard Business School and through collaboration with other organizations. We foster a global conversation that addresses the challenges of leadership in context, across time and location. We encourage interdisciplinary exchange in order to bridge the gap between scholarship and practice." The site on the internet even has a test your leadership skills survey. Well, I took it and I flunked it. Now, books about leadership abound as well. I did a little search on Amazon.com and came up with only 190,000 books. I didn't read them all before coming. The topic of women in leadership, is also a popular topic, a much debated topic. Sheryl Sandberg's bestseller, Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead is just one example. The book's introduction is this, and I quote, 30 years after women became 50% of the college graduates in the United States, men still hold the vast majority of leadership positions in government and industry. This means that women's voices are still not heard equally in the decisions that most affect our lives. In Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg examines why women's progress in achieving leadership roles has stalled, explaining the root causes and offering compelling, common-sense solutions that can empower women to achieve their full potential. End of quote. Now, to be sure, Sandberg makes some interesting points, but let me tell you, she also has her critics. Just look, for example, at the Washington Post article by Rosa Brooks, "Recline, Don't Lean In," published last February, which offers a humorous critique of this book. Brooks begins, quote, "I had an epiphany the other day. I was in the middle of marking up a memo on U.S. drone policy while simultaneously ordering a custom decorated cake for my daughter's 6th grade musical cast party and planning my remarks for a roundtable on women in national security. Suddenly it hit me. I hate Sheryl Sandberg. she then goes on to offer a counter argument, basically suggesting that the stress of leaning in just wasn't worth it. In fact, it was really ruining her life. And thus her title, Recline, Don't Lean In. Well, I'm not here today to enter into the merits of this or any other book on leadership. I merely wanted to point out that really it's a much debated topic in business, in the church, and in education. And one thing is clear, and this does come from Harvard Business School. True leaders leave their mark. Leadership is about making others better because of your presence and making sure the impact lasts after your absence. Now, St. Teresa of Avila surely made others better because of her presence. And all of us who are sitting in this room today, especially I think the Carmelite women, can witness that the impact has lasted in her absence, though we know that really she's never very far from us. St. Teresa has been presented as a leader in some recent literature. I just want to mention a few things I read recently. Some of you probably know other books, so you can tell me afterwards, okay? And let me read some more. Anyway, these are two doctoral dissertations that I came upon recently. And one was by a Descalce Carmelite, Matthew Azakath. I hope I said that correctly. He wrote a book with a really long title, Teresian Leadership, A Historical Analysis. Teresa of Avila, reformer, foundress, leader, mystic, writer, saint, doctor of the church. This was written for Fordham Graduate School of Education in 2012, and he talks about Teresa as a transformational leader, suggesting that she, quote, changed the situation, altered the conversation, focused on divine goals, symbolized by her own being and action, what the transformation looks like, motivated her sisters and friars to do more than they might have conceived possible, uplifting her followers then and now who hunger for God to transcend an ordinary life to an extraordinary one. So that was one dissertation I read, which was quite interesting to see how he put together, some of the more contemporary understandings of leadership and reflected on Teresa's life. It was a very broad study. Another book, and also the fruit of a doctoral dissertation, it comes from Australia by Christine Cameron, 2012. And this book is on the lives and works of Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena, and Therese of Lisieux. And she explores Teresian leadership through the lens of Robert Greenleaf's writings on servant leadership. Remember, that was popular some years ago. And on the writings of Larry Spears with his 10 core characteristics of servant leadership. Now, both of these studies are really much broader than anything I want to do today, and maybe more, what I want to do today is something very simple and very humble, and that is I just want to share with you the fruit of rereading the book of her foundations, and just focus on some of the leadership qualities that I found in there. Okay, I certainly won't cover all of the qualities, but my goal, if there was a learning goal, those of us who are in education are always thinking about learning goals. I guess my learning goal would be this for you, that I might inspire you to just read the book, to read it or to reread it, and especially if you're in a position of leadership, that you might actually read it again and ask yourself, well, what's it saying? What is St. Teresa saying to me today about leadership? I think it's a really important book. So you might ask me, well, what is your problem? Why on earth are you focusing on the book of her foundations? And after all, it is, in the work of Father Mark Foley, the least read, the least quoted, and the least known of her four major works. By the way, if you don't know the marvelous study guide that Father Foley published, it's really, really good, and you can buy it here. So maybe, you might want to stop by the bookstore on the way out. Now, though it's true that the Foundations is not the first book people turn to when reading Teresa, I hope I can convince you today that it does contain a mine of practical insights on leadership that can really inspire you and I today. This is what I want to do. I was first introduced to Teresa more than 30 years ago by a Carmelite priest, Father Chris O'Donnell. Some of you might know Father Chris. And I'm grateful to him because he really helped me to enter into the beauty of Carmel, and especially into Teresa's writings. And specifically, I don't know why, but I just started with the book of her Foundations. Now, it's an odd place to start, but that's where I started. And maybe because what I do in Rome is very practical and down to earth, and that book is a bit earthy somehow, and it just speaks to my heart, and it spoke to my heart then, and just reading it again now has really been very helpful for me. Anyway, this book is really the story, I think, of like a vocation within a vocation, you might say. It's fascinating, and she chronicles her adventures, and they were adventures of founding 17 reform convents, 15 that she herself founded, and 2 that were founded under her direction. She was 47 years old when she was inspired to form small communities of women, a group of friends gathered in the Lord, who would live totally for him. Now, these women committed themselves to following a sober lifestyle dedicated to contemplative prayer at the service of the church. And she begins this work of reform when she's 52. So she was inspired when she was 47. She begins the work of her reform at 52, but only commences the writing account of her adventures 5 years later when she was 57. It took her 10 years to complete the Foundations. She finished it only when she was 67, just a few months before her death. In the Foundations, what she does is she recounts her tough times, the tough times that she experienced as she traveled through Spain, founding various Reform Carmelite monasteries. And if you read between the lines, she showers us with wisdom about how she lived through these tough times. And she also leaves us with some best practices for leadership, and especially leadership when times are tough. Now, I'm sure in Carmelite communities, leadership never gets tough. Today, things are much better than they were in her time, but no. But I think she can help us out. Okay, now, before exploring the gift of leadership, her gift of leadership, I guess it's helpful to review some background information on the Book of the Foundations, how it was written, and just a little bit of background information in case you haven't read it before. And so those of you who are experts or scholars or whoever, just you'll have to offer it up that I'm going through this now, or you can see if I made any mistakes and correct me. Okay? Either one. Okay. So, as I told you, the book, the Foundations, were written between 1573 and 1582, really the last decade of her life. And though some parts were penned during long pauses in Salamanca, in Avila, in Toledo, in Palencia, Soria, and Burgos, we know that others were written when she was on the go. She sometimes kept her manuscripts with her, in the covered wagon that brought her from one town to another. She felt that God was calling her to write the history of the foundations of the various Carmels. Early on in the foundation, she tells us that her confessor, a Jesuit father, confirmed this when he ordered her to start a chronicle on the foundations. And later on, her friend and her confessor, Father Gracian, also encouraged her to continue the task. Now, Father Thomas Alvarez suggests that there were four basic stages, and I just want to go over these quickly. And I also want to do another encouragement of buying a book. This has just come out in English. It's really great. The Divine Adventure. It's on her journeys and foundations, and really it's a very good summary of what I'm going to say now. So the first period we have it begins in 1573, and it marks the time when Teresa was prioress at Incarnation in Avila. And she found herself at a certain point in Salamanca, where she was, as usual, negotiating something, this time with Pedro de la Banda, about buying a new house for her community. And it was there that she wrote chapters 1 to 9 about the first two foundations. And in these chapters, she also, of course, digresses. What a surprise. And this is why I think people have a tough time reading this book. She digresses because she really, all of a sudden, she goes off on this tangent about prioresses, how the prioresses need to be troubleshooters in Carmel, especially regarding how to deal with melancholic nuns, people who have visions, raptures, and ecstasies. All of a sudden she said, you just got to deal with this right now. And so she spends a few chapters on it. It's quite fascinating, actually. Well, the second period, from 1574, you see Teresa kind of alternating her residence between Avila and Valladolid. And in her account, she's not afraid to include also situations that are unsettling, that are difficult for her. And as Father Alvarez notes, these include the stunning entry of Casilda de Padilla in the Carmel of Valladolid, and the exit of the Princess of Eboli from the Carmel in Pastrana. Now that woman was crazy. She was really crazy. And also the end of her term as prioress at the Incarnation in Avila. So this section includes the various foundations: Valladolid, Toledo, Pastrana, and Salamanca. And it also makes reference to the beginning stages of the founding of Duruelo by John of the Cross. Please excuse my terrible Spanish pronunciation, which is worse than my Italian pronunciation. The third period is from 1576, between August and November. Teresa wrote about the foundations of Alba, Segovia, Beas, Seville, and Caravaca, and these include chapters 20 to 27. And from every indication, especially looking at the two epilogues in chapter 27, it seems that she thinks the book is finished. Oh, happy day. For 4 years, nothing much is written, except in 1579, she adds the 4 councils to the others on 2 blank pages. She was ecological long before Pope Francis came out with Laudato Si. She has a couple blank pages, so she just fills those in. And then between 1580 and 82, she writes the account of the 4 final foundations. And some historical background of this period around 1580 and the foundations of Villanueva de la Yara and Palencia are included in chapters 28 and 29, and it goes on. But anyway, the point is that she concludes with chapter 30, where she describes the founding of Burgos in 1582. So this is kind of an overview, and here is a great map that my Carmelite friends gave me to just give you an idea of where these foundations are. And if you look in this book, it's really amazing. It shows the different heights. You know, she went from, high mountains to low places. I don't know Spain very well, but really to think of her traveling to found these various monasteries, it is amazing. And we have to remember she was sick most of the time that she was doing it. So this is another way of looking at the different foundations, just to have the dates all together of the places. So why on earth did she undertake this project? Well, the answer to this question, I think, is the key to it all. It's the key to why she persevered. Long before Pope Francis and his call to share the joy of the gospel to the ends of the earth, to the peripheries, Teresa had a real missionary zeal to go out and to spread the gospel. Teresa was really swept up with kind of this evangelical enterprise with the discovery of the New World in the air. And for example, after a Franciscan friar told her about, all the people who didn't know Christ in the Americas, she refers to it as the Indies, but it was the Americas, she pleads with God for a part in this project. She wants to take part in this project of bringing the gospel to these places. And so deep in her heart, she felt this missionary zeal. And she recognized that one of the most powerful ways to participate in this mission was paradoxically not to get on a boat. It was paradoxically to create small communities of sisters, friends in the Lord, who would dedicate themselves to contemplative prayer as a way of serving the church, as a way of bringing the gospel to others. And she heard the Lord call her to move beyond her own comfort zone, to go out of herself, to leave the peace of San Jose in Avila, and to go out and find these other communities. So, what was her response to the crisis that she really felt in the church? The crisis, also many of the things that we heard about yesterday, the crisis in the church and this call to go out and share the gospel with others. It was to found these communities. As Pope Francis recently said in an address to Discalced Carmelites, he says, Saint Teresa knew that neither prayer nor mission can be sustained without authentic community life. That's a very powerful phrase, that neither prayer nor mission can be sustained without authentic community life. Therefore, the foundation that she laid in her monasteries was fraternity, was community life. Here, everyone must love one another, care for one another, and help one another. It's a quote from Teresa. And she was very careful to warn her sisters about the danger of individualism in community life, fraternal life, which consists, quote, all or almost all in the denial of ourselves and of our own comforts, and to place ourselves at the service of others. So during her lifetime, not everyone, as you know, was overjoyed with her writings and her efforts at reform. And though Teresa was beatified only 35 years after her death, church authorities did not always appreciate her during her lifetime. For example, at one point we know that the book of her life was denounced to the Inquisition. And even though no charges were brought against Teresa, and she was never actually brought to trial, this autobiography was never returned to her. It stayed in the archives of the Inquisition until 1588, 6 years after her death. And in 1580, her confessors had suggested that she also burn the Meditations on the Song of Songs, which might be considered suspect. She did, but fortunately others had copies, so that helped. In 1589, 7 years after her death, and a mere 17 before her beatification in 1614, the theologians of the Inquisition had suggested that maybe it would be just a good idea to burn all of her books. Well, during her lifetime, we've heard, that the papal nuncio once described her as a vagabond and said other things about her as well, but we'll leave that for now. Okay, let's go on to the book of the foundations, of her foundations, and I'll just say few more little things about it and then go into my 10 points that I want to mention regarding leadership. So, a superficial reading might lead us to suggest that it's just a chronicle, kind of a poorly written chronicle of Teresa's journeys, and that at times it's a bit boring and tedious. Teresa herself admits, "I have digressed much." And, she's a little bit like I am. She gets distracted kind of easily and can go off on a tangent that seems to have absolutely nothing to do with the main point. And all of this, though, shouldn't detract us from the main message of the work. Even focusing on the foundations alone, Teresa is always both a founder and a mystic. And this is a point that was very well made by Father Thomas Alvarez when he notes, "She brings together," quote, "spontaneously, mysticism and history. She presents in the length and breadth of the narration a micro-history of nuns' travels and of nascent Carmels. Yet all of this is seen with a mystical gaze and focus. She doesn't allow this singular focus to empty the facts of material realism or let them get out of focus in the least way. Thus the roads continue to be dusty, the young lads who care for the mules continue to become muleteers, and the quagmires of Arlanzon continue to be full of mud and cold. Yet it results at the same time that what is mystical is also historical, well dated, and contextualized." The end of quote. Okay, so now I'd like to move on to the second part and the main part of my talk, the final part. The 10 best practices for leaders, revisiting the book of her foundations. I've divided them up in groups of 3, and then I'll end with one alone, number 10. So the foundations bring us very close to Teresa. They bring Teresa very close to us. Her humanity shines forth on every page. And so The first characteristic of a leader is to be human. To be human. Teresa is not a saint on a pedestal. She is one of us. She gets sick. She breaks her arm. She had such problems that she was accompanied by a nurse, as we heard yesterday, Sister Ana de San Bartolome, on all of her journeys. She becomes discouraged and encounters failure. And perhaps she offers us an alternative way of leadership training for those who flunk the Harvard Business School survey. Or who just cannot manage to be Superman or Superwoman leaders. She shows that God works in her life in the midst of the physical or spiritual struggles that she's experiencing. For St. Teresa, weakness and strong leadership paradoxically coincide. Weakness and strong leadership paradoxically coincide. For example, chapter 29 gives us a glimpse of her state of mind while recovering from a serious illness and while on the road. She writes frankly, "I felt so listless and so unable to think of doing anything that I could not go ahead with making a foundation in Palencia." In fact, much of chapter 29 is filled with a description of her illness, her listlessness, anxiety, and indecision. We see her struggles, her complaints to the Lord, her attempts to seek counsel of others, and it's precisely in the midst of this muddle that the Lord speaks to her and gives her courage, saying, "What do you fear? Where have I failed you? I am the same now as I was before." In the Foundations, we see not only her humanity, but also her humility. So the second characteristic is be humble, as we heard in the morning prayer this morning. Humility matters. This is a title of a little book by Sister Margaret Funk, and she writes, "Humility matters. It's what others see of our purity of heart. It's at the core of our experience of life in Christ." Humility for us as Christians is knowing who God is and who we are. Humility is knowing that without God we can do nothing, and really, friends, without God we are nothing. Humility is about living in the truth. And Teresa's experience of her own human weakness helped her to understand that the various foundations were God's work. She writes, and I quote, "Therefore, it's often made clear that it's not I who do any of these foundations, but the work is His who is all-powerful in everything." At the same time, her gifts, including her administrative and financial acumen, should not be underestimated, for they were instrumental in the success of these foundations. Teresa also knew how not to take herself too seriously. And so that's the third point I have for a good leader, is have a sense of humor. Really, the foundations ring out with this humor. And my favorite example is her account of founding San Jose in Salamanca, chapter 19, and the sleepless nights she spent with her companion, Sister Maria de Sacramento, on the night of All Saints and the eve of All Souls Day, in a, quote, rickety house that had just been vacated by students who, quote, must not have had the gift of cleanliness. This is Teresa's charitable way to say that the house was a mess. Now, she laughs at the incident as she shares the story of how she tries to calm both her companion and herself on this scary night when they first feared that disgruntled students might be lurking around in the locked room. So they were a bit afraid, and one thing led to another, and it's just a very humorous situation. So humanity, humility, and humor, they mark every page of the book. And they're essential attitudes, I think, for leadership both in the 16th century and today. Teresa experienced tough times as she journeyed through Spain trying to found the various communities. She faced, for example, financial trouble, tensions with her own religious superiors and other church authorities, and lawsuits. The foundations, though, lead us with one crucial point, and here I want to quote Father Mark Foley. He says, St. Teresa of Avila grew in holiness not in spite of obstacles such as being entangled in lawsuits, mired down in disputes over dowries, tied up in interminable bureaucratic red tape, involved in political infighting in the church, and having to deal with unscrupulous businessmen, but because of these difficulties. So those are my first 3 points. The first 3 points: be human, be humble, have a sense of humor. Now I want to move on to my next 3 points, which won't take so long. Don't worry, I will finish on time. Okay? So my next 3 points: be discerning, be decisive, be determined. So with regard to discernment, finding and doing God's will was fundamental, especially when determining if she should found a monastery or not, a new foundation or not. Now, one example of this occurs on Pentecost in 1569. You can just see Teresa, after finally completing the work of the Toledo Foundation, she says, I was tired after those days from going about with the workmen. If you've ever gone around with the workmen, you know what she means. So she says, when the vigil of Pentecost came, all the work was done. That morning, as we sat in the refectory to eat, great consolation came over me to see that I no longer had anything to do. And that I could enjoy some time with the Lord on Pentecost. Can you imagine just how she felt? Wow. So here, though, her peace and quiet was short-lived, because just then, what happens? A servant arrives by saying that the princess of Eboli came with, the servant came with a message from the princess of Eboli, saying that Teresa should urgently, right now, get up and go to Pastrana to discuss founding a monastery there. Well, that crazy woman. Teresa firmly said, look, I'm not going. I'm not going. And she told the servant that. But the servant was insistent. He says, look, I've got everything ready. The carriage is ready. We've got to go right now. Let's go. Yep. And so Teresa decides to pray about it. So she goes to the Lord in prayer. And she clearly hears the Lord say to her, quote, not to fail to go, that she was going, quote, for more than the foundation, and that she should bring along the rule and the constitutions. Well, interestingly, and I think this is a very important lesson for us, she doesn't rely only on what she hears from the Lord. She goes to her confessor and she asks him, "What do you think?" Now she says, "I didn't tell him what I had heard in prayer. In this way, I'm always left more satisfied, for I beg the Lord to give my confessors light in conformity with what they can know naturally. And when His Majesty wants something to be done, He puts it in their hearts. This has happened to me many times. So it happened this time, for after considering everything, he thought I should go. And with that, I decided to leave." Now, here, I think we see Teresa obviously in a situation what we would call today receiving some sort of spiritual direction. It's in the context of confession from someone whom she trusts. And I wonder if this is a message for us today too, all of us, especially if we're in leadership. We need to be humble enough to seek advice and counsel from others. And part of the discernment process is confirming in some way outside of ourselves that our decision is the right one. So I would say that all leaders, women and men, so it's not just women who are in Carmelite monastery, Carmels, who have to do it, but women and men who are in leadership really need someone to whom they are accountable. Well, once the decision was made, Teresa is decisive. She moved forward no matter what the cost. Again, this is demonstrated in various passages in the foundations. We won't go into them, but they're there. Specifically, and links it with a third characteristic, to act with determined determination. You know, the same perseverance that Teresa applied to prayer applies to the practical things of life. Sometimes we just have to have a very determined determination. And a good example of this is described in chapter 3, when she found herself in dire straits in Medina trying to found a monastery. Her major problem was that she had permission, fine, but not a house and not a penny to buy it with. It's a little bit of a problem. Anyway, everything was against her. Everyone was against her, including the bishop who didn't. There's a lot of negative criticism. Even the bishop who thought the idea was foolish, he didn't exactly block her, but he did. She tells us that he didn't want to hurt her feelings, to tell her, what a bad idea all this was. Anyway, even in this painful situation, again, she prays again, and she goes ahead, and despite everything and all the problems that she found there, she found the monastery. She almost sees all of these problems as good news, and she exclaims in prayer, "Oh God, help me. When you, Lord, want to give courage, how little do all contradictions matter. Rather, it seems I'm encouraged by them, thinking that since the devil is beginning to be disturbed, the Lord will be served in that monastery." So that's my second group of points. Be discerning, be decisive, be determined. And now the third and the last set. Focus on the mission, fear not, find God among the pots and the pans. As a leader, or find God in the daily. As a leader, Teresa teaches us to keep our eyes on the goal. She had the conviction that God was calling her to found these various Carmels in Spain. What we see in the foundations is that she persevered in the tough task of this mission. She endured personal hardship, but she realized that it was for a greater good. Carmel flourishes today because Teresa had the courage to risk everything, to move out of her comfort zone and to follow God's call. It's a very strong statement, but I think it's true that Carmel flourishes today because Teresa, like many others, had the courage to risk everything, to move out of her comfort zone, and to follow God's call. And sometimes we just have to keep our eye on the goal. There are times when God's will is costly, personally, as leaders, as individuals, in our families, in our religious communities. And yet, isn't it often the case that when we look back, we see the fruit of the sacrifice? So I think Teresa challenges us, especially for those who are in leadership, to move out of your comfort zone, to help others in the communities not to be closed in on themselves, but to have the courage to go out to the peripheries. On this note, I'm struck by a quote. I often quote it by John Henry Newman, and so sorry I'm bringing Newman in the middle of this, but it really is a great quote, so I'm going to quote it anyway. He says, "Nothing is so likely to corrupt our hearts and to seduce us from God so as to surrender ourselves with comforts, to have things our own way, to be the center of a sort of world, whether of things animate or inanimate, which minister to us." Now, in her meditations on the Song of Songs, Teresa says something similar in Meditation 2, where she cautions the sisters about getting too comfortable. She suggests that this can lead to a false sense of peace. We become complacent, and we live, and I'm quoting Foley here, I like this so much, an unruffled, undisturbed life because it has cloistered itself from the demands of charity. That's a great quote, isn't it? I'm going to repeat it. It's not mine, it's a quote. An unruffled, undisturbed life because it has cloistered itself from the demands of charity. So this is a big problem when this happens to us, and it can happen to all of us, whether we're in a monastery or in the midst of the world, whatever. We do it, and it's so subtle. So the foundations are filled with examples of Teresa moving out of herself, out of her comfort zone to serve others. Consistently, almost without exception, every foundation has some problem or another. Either a deal went wrong, or she finds herself without money, or a bishop who had actually invited her there just reneges on the invitation. It's one thing after another, and yet she moved out of her comfort zone and persevered, and we're really grateful to her for that today. Okay, the eighth point, we're getting towards the end. Be fearless, do not be afraid. There's a great passage in the Gospel of Luke. Fear is useless. What is needed is trust. Fear paralyzes. It blocks us from doing what God wants us to do. Fear can corrode community life. It's really, really dangerous to be a fearful leader. It's very dangerous for the community, very dangerous for the church. And so Teresa teaches us how to overcome our fear. And I'd like to look at one example from early on in the foundations. She had this great desire to encourage more sisters to embrace the primitive rule and to found more communities. And so here comes a golden opportunity when the prior general of the order, Father Giovanni Battista Rossi, comes to Spain. And he arrives in Spain with a major problem. And the problem was he was trying to reform communities of friars who had no desire to be reformed. It's a problem. It's a problem. And Teresa realized that if only she could speak with him, she might get his approval and she could move on with her ideas of reform. But she was afraid, and I won't go into it here, but she describes in detail her fear. He obviously, by the way, Father Giovanni Battista Rossi was probably not as approachable as our Father Fernando. Anyway, she overcame this fear and she contacted him, and not only did she receive this approval, but he encouraged her to found other monasteries and provided her with official papers. So she writes, "Here I was, a poor, discalced nun, without help from anywhere, only from the Lord, weighed down with patent letters and good desires." It was a good start for founding the Carmels. As she looks back at this crossroad, it really was a crossroad from a distance of like 7 years and having founded all these various Carmels in Spain, she must have realized, wow, how important it was that God had given her the courage to overcome her fears. And now we come to the 9th point, finding God in the daily. You know, she's famous for the lines, and I love it, especially when I'm trying to get people to wash dishes, where she says, God walks among the pots and the pans. I live with a lot of students. There are 22 of us, and we take turns washing dishes. And so I try to remind people of this. They're not always convinced. Anyway, God walks among the pots and the pans. And what's the context of this saying? Well, it comes from the book of the Foundations. And the context is that Teresa encourages her sisters to trust God, that God is leading them. And at the end of the day, what's important, she says, is to be obedient to God's will. To be obedient to God's will. And she writes, "Well, come now, my daughters, don't be sad. When obedience draws you to involvement in exterior matters, know that if it is in the kitchen, the Lord walks among the pots and pans, helping you both interiorly and exteriorly." And she speaks from experience, because this is where she found God in the last 10 years of her life, precisely in doing the grueling work of traveling through Spain to found so many communities. She had to deal with lots of practical issues, and I won't go in them here because I'm running out of time. So Teresa shows us in her writings the practical way that God is with us in the daily activities of life. God is with us walking among the pots and pans. Everything that happens in the course of the day, the people we meet, the struggles we have, the beauty around us, the insults, all are revealing the will of God. And this gives us a different view of the world. Everything suddenly becomes charged with meaning. So what's Teresa's 10th point? I leave it blank. I leave it blank. I have a lot of ideas. I like to fill in about 20 different things. For example, thinking of her compassion, her care for her sisters, so many things. But I leave it blank because I invite you to read the book and decide. And perhaps your list will be very different from mine, which is fine. Let Teresa speak to you. Let St. Teresa speak to you. Let her invite you to her style of leadership. We need this sort of leadership in the 21st century. And I want to conclude with a quote from Pope Francis. I love the image, for example, of Teresa walking on the journey, her stick in her hand, on the go. She's walking with us, leading us on the way. And Pope, in one of the letters to the Carmelites on the occasion of this anniversary, Pope Francis wrote, sometimes the saint abbreviated her letters saying, "We're on the way," as an expression of the urgency to continue to the end of the tasks begun. When the world is burning, one cannot lose time in matters of little importance, she said. May she infect all with the holy desire to go on the path in our own time, with the gospel in hand and the Spirit in our hearts. It's time to walk. These words of St. Teresa on the point of dying are really the synthesis of her life. It's time to walk, and it's time for me to stop.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Donna. I was looking very forward to your talk, and I certainly was very pleased with it. It was even more than I expected, and I couldn't help but think as you were going through her adventures in the foundations and all that meant and how it developed her. I couldn't help but think about how it parallels your work with the Lay Center, and you must have a real identification with Teresa because of the ups and the downs and the struggles to do God's will, as you've done so brilliantly with the Lay Center in Rome. So thank you very much.